Welcome to today's webinar. I know we've got a lot more people signed up than have joined so far, but we have a really packed agenda. So I'm going to get started straight away. I think I've got a couple of slides first to take us through a bit of housekeeping. So this webinar will be recorded and will be made available on the IWA Connect Plus platform. Speakers are responsible for securing copyright permissions, and I won't read out all the rest of the words there, but you can read them on the screen. Next slide, please. Just in terms of interaction, we were just having a chat in our practice session and conscious that not all of us use Zoom every day. If you can use the chat box for any general interactions or chat between yourselves, which I would greatly encourage, then please use the chat box. There is a separate Q&A box to ask any questions you'd like to ask of our panelists. That Q&A box will be monitored to make sure that we can cover as many of the questions as possible during our two Q&A panels. So next slide, please. So thank you to everybody for joining today's webinar. And before we start the session today, I'd like to briefly set the scene by introducing the IWA World Water Congress in Glasgow and the work specifically of the Women in Water Committee. Yeah, if you want to flip on 2 slides, I'll come back to the agenda. So if you can flip on, thank you. So the Congress in Glasgow is a major global event for the water sector. Many of you have probably been to these Congress events before, and it brings together leaders, practitioners, innovators from all around the world to help tackle critical challenges and help shape the future of water. The Women in Water programme is going to be embedded throughout all elements of Congress. We're not going to have a Women's Day. We will be running a programme that goes throughout Congress. And our ambition as a planning committee, which I'll come on to in a moment, is that Glasgow 2026 is the most welcoming Congress to date for women worldwide, wherever you are joining from across the world, and recognising both the shared and region-specific challenges that women experience across the sector. I'm chairing the Women in Water Planning Committee, which is made up of highly experienced women from across the global water sector, really bringing together that deep expertise and diverse perspectives to Congress. Our committee is supporting Congress by shaping and promoting sessions that champion gender equality, inclusive participation and diverse leadership. And our work is really guided by 3 key aims. Firstly, to act as a conscience on gender parity, to ensure that we support balanced panels and representative speaker lineup from women from across the world. We aim to drive informed debate on gender-related issues through high-quality speakers and, really importantly, and we'll touch on this today, through data-led insight. And thirdly, to build a strong global community of women, fostering connection and support both before, during and after Congress. And one of the things we'll hope to get out of today in some of our polls is understanding for women or people coming to Congress, what would you like to see in advance? What would help you make a decision to come to Congress if you're uncertain? And what are some of the topics you'd like us to cover? So this is the first of a series of webinars, which are really aiming to initiate discussion and engagement. In this, our first launch webinar, we'll be focusing really specifically on what action we need to take to drive gender parity. What topics should we explore? We'll be exploring the need for resilience, both personal resilience as a woman and organisational resilience to ensure the prosperity of our global water sector. And we will have a number of polls throughout today's webinar, and we're really encourage you to take part in those polls because we are keen for that to inform our programme for the webinars and our Women in Water programme at Congress, which is very much in the early planning stages. Jill, who I'm going to hand over to a minute, is our UK lead. I think if I go to the next slide, it shows who's on my planning committee. So we have a leadership group from IWA, who effectively, as a planning committee, which I chair, we report into. Our UK lead is Jill Edwards, and the UK group is leading this first of our series of webinars. So on that note, I will hand over to Jill, who will share a little bit more about what to expect from today's session. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and welcome everybody. I'm absolutely delighted to see so many people here, new faces, new friends and existing contacts. So we took the opportunity to work this webinar in with International Women's Day. And the theme this year for the United Nations International Women's Day is Rights, Justice, Action for All Women and Girls. And this, I think, speaks directly to the role of the water sector. Right from village wells to urban networks, from community initiatives and to policy and regulation committees, we as a human race together act as guardians of water, protecting its promise and shaping its future. We know that when women and girls gain secure access to water, dignity is restored and futures grow brighter. When women are fully included in the workforce, organisations become stronger, more insightful and more resilient. Today's session is all about recognising our responsibility goes beyond delivering just water services. Inclusion doesn't happen by accident. Our responsibility goes beyond managing the flow of water in our countries. Our responsibility includes building capacity, creating opportunity and advancing equality, not only in policy, but in practice. This webinar is all about moving from commitment to system design, embedding inclusion into leadership, culture, and the way our systems truly work. So thank you ever so much for joining us and being part of the action. I'd really encourage anybody to ask questions of our panelists. We've got quite a few of them here, names you'll know and we'll get to know, and you're welcome to ask them anything. So with that, I welcome you to our webinar. And if we go back to Sarah, please.
Great, thank you very much, Jill. So our webinar today is in 3 sections. So the first one, I will talk briefly around the action that we need to take to move from commitment to system design. We'll then have a second session where we will focus more on resilience, and then our final and third session will focus on prosperity. And our mission for this is simple but really important: to bring together different voices from across the world to explore how we continue progressing towards a more equitable water industry, one that truly reflects the diversity of the communities it serves, and one that designs and operates in a way that delivers for everyone. And when we were creating the agenda for today and really just throwing some ideas around, many of us shared a similar reflection that the reason we work as women in the water industry and as humans in the water industry more generally is a really strong alignment to its purpose. But to be blunt, our industry has not always treated us as women with fairness or with respect. So I've now worked in the water industry for over 30 years. And during that time, it is absolutely true that progress has been made towards greater inclusive and diverse workplace cultures. But in my experience, much of that progress has been driven by the persistence and resilience of individual women working within the sector, rather than the systems and structures of the organisation themselves. And that distinction really matters. So I'd like to start with a personal story. 21 years ago, when I returned from my second maternity leave, I was offered my absolute dream job role. Don't judge me for this, but it was wastewater quality manager. It was a job I'd always aspired to do. But I didn't want to work full time, and it was a full-time job. So I requested a 4-day week. After a lot of discussion and persuasion, my manager reluctantly agreed. But he only agreed because his daughter was having a similar experience in the company she was working for. And what he said to me was he would support me as a father, but not as a director of that company. And even then, the arrangements that I reached came with conditions. I was not to tell anyone I was working part time because everyone would want to do it. And I led a team that was based on multiple sites. So to be honest, I sort of got away with it because I was on a different site every day and nobody realised I wasn't there on my non-working day. But really importantly, in that instance, the responsibility and the resilience required to make it work for me, for my family, and for my organisation was firmly and solely mine. And with hindsight, I should have challenged the situation more. If we look at this from a system perspective, because if I had spoken up, I might have helped shift workplace cultures and policies earlier than I eventually did. Perhaps I might have opened the door to more flexible working patterns for other people, particularly in operational roles. And we'll hear a bit more from Emily about some of the challenges that that brings. But at the time, like many women, I was simply grateful to still be doing the job that I loved. And mine is not an isolated story, and unfortunately, it's not one that's resigned to history. And this isn't just about working patterns, it's also about the way in which our sector is designed. A really small example, but an important one. It took me 17 years in operational roles to get issued with steel toe capped boots that fit my size 3 feet. Or to put it another way, for me to be able to work safely on site. And that sounds like a really small issue, a bit like my feet, but it isn't. Personal protective equipment and safety gear across many industries, including ours, has traditionally been designed around male bodies, and that creates real safety risks for women in the field. And it reflects a broader truth that much of the world is still designed around the default male. So, how do we move away from individual women taking that responsibility towards organisations taking the responsibility for gender parity? And how do we truly embed gender equality into our policies, our culture, and our infrastructure? Because the data tells us we still have work to do. Women remain underrepresented in the UK water sector and across the world. In fact, many of the discussions I've had over the last couple of months with women in the water industry across the world shows that in many ways in the UK we're further ahead, particularly with women taking on senior leadership positions. But if we look at the UK water sector, in 2024, women made up just 28% of our workforce. And the majority of those are in back office or more traditionally office-based roles. But at the same time, in 2023, nearly 30% of women left our sector. And if you ask those women why, they're pretty simple answers. The top 3 answers are male-dominated environments where they don't feel welcome, a lack of flexible working, and inadequate facilities and amenities for field staff. So crucially, women are actually leaving our sector faster than they're being recruited in the UK, which means our progress to gender parity is actually going backwards instead of forwards. We all know that poor inclusion leads to poorer outcomes for individuals, for communities, and for our sector. But if we move on to the word prosperity, one of our themes of Congress 2026 and today's webinar, that means a lot more than financial security. It includes physical, mental, and emotional health, and a state where individuals or societies have the opportunity to succeed, grow, and prosper. And our Women in Water programme will also look more broadly at gender parity in the access to clean and safe drinking water and access to sanitation services. According to UN statistics, 1 in 3 women around the world lack access to safe toilets. This is not a world where women have equitable opportunity to succeed and to thrive. However, even when we look through a very narrow lens of financial prosperity, Multiple studies show that gender diversity, particularly in decision-making teams, is associated with higher profitability, greater innovation, and stronger employee engagement. So we need to ask ourselves the question of, are we currently being intentional about building water industries that work for everyone? And if we think the answer is no, what are we going to do about it? What action can we take? What actions can businesses take? How can communities speak up? And how do our male allies provide some support? And we will hear from some of those male allies in a short while. Because equity is not a side conversation, it's not a women's issue. It's absolutely fundamental to building the resilient, innovative, and future ready water sector that our communities and our environment needs and deserves. So, thank you again for joining us. I'll be chairing our sessions with the speakers throughout our webinar. And I really look forward to your questions and today's discussion. I've been trying not to get distracted by all the notes popping up. But as a reminder, this session really is designed to be interactive. And it's all about taking action. So please do ask questions, use the chat function to share reflections, and please do take part in our polls. So on that note, Jill, do we have our first poll, as if by magic, has appeared in front of us? It says poll 2. So the question we're asking here is, what would you find most valuable in your current career stage? So if you can vote on those while we now welcome our first panel. And in this first panel, we'll focus in on resilience and on the importance of male allies. We'll hear from each of our panellists, and then we will take questions from the room at the end. So on that note, I will hopefully hand over to Emily Timmins.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
Brilliant, you're there. I will let you introduce yourself, Emily, and yes, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, and thank you so much for inviting me today. Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you are in the universe. My name is Emily Timmins, and I'm currently the Operational Director at Anglian Water, and it's wonderful to be here. So my job is probably to share with you some of my lived experiences and my thoughts around personal resilience and organisational resilience, which I hope you'll find useful and will bombard me with lots of questions afterwards. So when people hear phrases like organisational resilience, they often think about infrastructure, systems, crisis response. I think about meetings. I think about who speaks. I think about who stays silent, and I think about who leaves, which is highly relevant when you hear those stats from Sarah. Now, I'm sharing this today from my own personal lived experience as a woman with around 30 years operational experience in the water industry, working in leadership roles in a sector that I care really passionately about, because I've learned that resilience isn't just built in moments of crisis, it's built in everyday leadership behaviours, often in ways we don't notice until something breaks. So what that looked like early in my career, resilience really meant fitting in. It meant preparing twice as much to feel credible, choosing words carefully. I didn't sound too much or maybe not enough, and watching the room constantly to work out whether it was safe to challenge something. There were rooms where invariably I was the only woman, rooms where quite often I was the youngest, rooms where I felt I had to earn the right to speak every single time. What I didn't realise was how much that energy was taking in terms of the toll on me personally, and not just emotional energy, but cognitive energy as well at the same time. And when talented people are spending that amount of energy managing themselves, they're not using it to manage risk. They're not using it to spot issues early or maybe even innovate. And that's where personal experience and organisational resilience start to intersect. So personal resilience as a woman, I think in terms of my learning into the universe, what I can share with you. So over time, my understanding of personal resilience is completely transformed. It stopped being about putting up with things and started being about how I protect my clarity, my and certainly my energy. And I'll share with you a couple of learning points. Key one is not to internalize everything. For a long time, I assumed that if it felt uncomfortable, it must be something I was doing that I needed to fix. Now I pause and ask myself, is this actually about my performance, or is this about the environment within which I'm operating? That shift alone has increased my personal resilience. Not every awkward interaction is a personal failing on my part. Not every silence is disapproval, and not every challenge needs to be absorbed emotionally by me. Resilience grew when I stopped taking responsibility for things that weren't mine. The second point is building self-trust through action and not just reassurance. I used to wait for confidence before stepping forward. What I've learned is that confidence comes after you act, not before. And that's the element of growth. Some of the most resilience building moments for me when saying yes before I felt ready, backing my own judgment even when I felt uncomfortable, and learning that I could recover if something didn't go personally well. Resilience isn't ever about doubting yourself. It's about trusting that you'll cope even when that happens. The third thing is not doing it alone. One of my biggest mistakes early in my career was trying to be resilient privately. What actually helped was having people I could be honest with, peers who understood the context without the explanation, and trusted voices who could say, "You're not imagining that." Those connections didn't make me weaker. They made me steadier. They made me more resilient. And personal resilience isn't just built in isolation, it's built through connection. This is where inclusive leadership really, really matters. I've worked with leaders who have unintentionally made my resilience harder by rewarding uncertainty or rewarding certainty over curiosity, valuing speed over reflection, and mistaking silence for alignment. I've worked with leaders who have made resilience so much easier by asking for different views, creating spaces for challenge without that feeling of penalty or failure, and noticing who was not being heard in the room. The difference between those two environments is absolutely massive. And inclusive environments, women don't just have to be constantly resilient just to function. They can focus on leading, thinking, and contributing. That's when organisations become resilient too, because more of their intelligence is actually being used. So what has sustained me over time? Networks. They weren't optional for me. They were absolutely essential, not for visibility or perspective. Like, it was key for me that I had that, I suppose, that sort of anchor back to how everybody else was feeling too. They helped me check decisions, process difficult moments, and remember who I was when things felt really noisy or uncomfortable. The strongest networks for me weren't the hierarchical networks. They were based on trust, honesty, and shared experience. Organisations that support networks, formally or informally, aren't just supporting individuals. They're building a collective resilience that holds even under pressure. Also, some of my most resilient moments in terms of my personal growth, particularly in this career, particularly in this industry, have come from my male colleagues who use their position thoughtfully. Not grand gestures, because nobody wants that. Nobody wants to be called out in the room that, you know, that my gender is important. It's the small and consistent actions that they allowed. Backing my personal judgment in rooms where I wasn't present, interrupting patterns that limited my participation, and treating inclusion as part of good leadership and not just something that somebody's just gone on a course and thinks it's an add-on. That kind of allyship didn't lower standards, it universally raised them. It created environments where people could focus on work and not managing dynamics. And those environments are far more resilient. So, bringing it together, when we talk about building organisational resilience, I'd encourage us to look beyond the structures and the strategies and look at whose energy is being drained, whose voice is being muted, and whose resilience is being quietly over-relied upon. Personal resilience matters, but it should absolutely not be a survival skill. Inclusive leadership ensures that resilience becomes a shared organisational strength, not an individual's burden. And with that in mind, I get a fantastic opportunity to hand over to our next speaker, who will also sort of pick up on some of these lived experience into lasting leadership capabilities through organisations, particularly emphasising that male allyship piece. Thank you, Sarah.
Great, thank you very much, Emily, and you'll be sticking around to join us for the Q&A session. So moving on then from Emily, thank you very much for sharing your personal experiences. Key within that, we've got another poll just popped up on the screen. If everyone could, sorry, it was probably my error. We missed poll 1, so if everyone could just vote on that one. But Emily, you're talking there about people using their position thoughtfully, particularly male allies, and those small consistent actions. So on that note, I'm going to ask our next two speakers to introduce themselves. I'll go to Ian first and then Tim. And if you can start by just maybe as a bit of a reaction to what Emily said, can you tell us what do you think is the most impactful thing that your organisation or you do personally to focus on male allyship, but also ensure that gender diversity is not tokenism?
Yeah, I will. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Emily, and everyone else for what you've said in advance. It's always difficult to follow such inspirational speakers. My name's Ian Kane, everybody. I'm the CEO of Retail and Customer Markets in Pennon, which is the owner of a number of different water companies in the UK. And I've got some long experience, like Sarah, in utilities, water and energy. I guess where I'd like to start, Sarah, is just to talk about my belief, really, and it sort of plays into a word that you guys have been using a lot today, deliberately, because that's the purpose, really, is resilience. And I start with the belief that thriving in an organisation or in life, I mean, it always will require resilience, but it shouldn't need the extra resilience that Emily was describing, that she had to display, that then took so much energy from the things that we generate great value from. And I was even thinking there of my son and his dyslexia, right? The energy that he has to put in just to turn up in the classroom to be like everybody else. Well, we need to level the playing field is the reality of that. And so that's a belief of mine, that we need to ensure that you don't have to do that to thrive. And then my job really is a leader is to widen the opportunity for all, so genuinely to be inclusive, to open that pipeline for talent, and to really make sure that that's baked, Sarah, as you say, not tokenism, into the systems and organisation. I think Pennon do well, and I've been in Pennon for about a year now. They're quite our organisation. Is they have achieved a great representation of females on the board, for example. 62%, I believe, is the latest number. 50-50 in terms of the exec-co, and wider and bigger than 50% representation in the wider leadership team. And as someone's already said, that's not happened by accident. So what I've been doing is trying to understand in the organisation what my colleagues have experienced. So even in talking to female colleagues this week, I said, well, what really have they done? Whilst we say it's not an accident, was it really? And what's very clear is they're very deliberate about gender pay. They're very deliberate about benchmarking all those roles in the pay of them. And as a result, they get a good result. They're very deliberate about inclusive leadership programs. They're very deliberate about values and skill sets and talent in recruitment. And they recruit for the person. Someone said to me, the other person said to me, they recruit for the human. And the other person said they recruit for you to be you. And what's inherent is that they're trying to find a person that will fit the organisation, that the organisation will also design itself around. And someone mentioned design of a role earlier. And I think that's a fundamental challenge for us. Perhaps we'll get to that moving forward, the design in our industry. So that's what some of the things that I think Pennon do well. And what they're doing is they're systemising those things in their processes. In addition, we've obviously got inclusive groups. We've got women's groups that have started through the organisation. So much more to do. And then from my perspective, I think what has worked for me is shifting a long time ago from a concept of thinking that I could mentor someone to make a difference through to actually I need to do a lot more than that. So how can I really make a difference? So how do I show up? How do I sponsor someone? How do I speak for them when they're not in the room? How do I advocate? How do I recognize in a way that isn't, as Emily says, calling somebody out in big fashion in a room, but how do I ensure they're not talked over? How do I bring people into a conversation? And how do I role model the little things that make a difference every single day? So I think that's the thing that I concentrate on, the circle of influence every day that I can really make a difference with, and then try and work out with that into colleagues and then business processes in the organisation. But I'll stop there. I'm sure Tim's got a lot to say and you've got some questions.
Great, thank you, Ian. Tim, same question for you. Introduce yourself and then thoughts on what is the most impactful in terms of those small, consistent actions, and maybe build a bit on what Ian said.
Absolutely. Firstly, thank you for inviting me today. I feel very honoured to attend, and listening to sort of the stories from Emily and sort of what she's had to do in her career is very eye-opening and always helps me as a leader. And I was wanting to touch on sort of three things really what we do within Southern Water, and sort of break it up into these sort of three pockets of sort of focus. The first one is about leading from the front. The second part is around the collective, so the greater good, the sort of the scale of ED&I and females in the workplace. And then thirdly, the systematic side, the procedures, processes, and what we change. Firstly, leading from the front. So I have the pleasure of sponsoring and chairing the Women's Network. And it's hugely eye-opening for me as a leader. And over the last sort of 18 months, 2 years that I've chaired that, it's really transformed the way I lead and it's made me think in a different way. Not just in work, but outside of work. Today there's been some chats in our Women's Network about some behaviours and how women are teaching their children about doing the right thing and consent. And there's a story about tea, a comedian making tea for their son and how they use that. And that sort of really helped me take things home with growing boys that I could therefore use for them. But also there's lots of other things that sort of comes out that really helps in terms of leadership. Second one is linked into that is I'm very much leading from the front in terms of senior leadership in my team. So half of my team are now female. When I joined, it was all male. And we've now got of our 8 core senior roles, the 6 successors for that are all female. So we're getting the throughput through, because as you said, Sarah, we're seeing lots of senior managers, but they're sort of middle, lower management, we're not seeing the same throughput. So that's something I'm really, really passionate about. In terms of then the scale, how do we get more leaders in the business? And Ian touched on this. You can only achieve what you can see. So your bit on tokenism is, I can talk about all the great things we do, but if you have no senior leaders in the business, then you've got nothing to aspire to. So we're a bit further behind than Pennell, but 35% of our senior leadership team are female. That's gone up about 15% in the last couple of years. So that's something we're continuing to build on. So people can see, they can see the light, they can see where they're going. But one that my boss does particularly well, which really then spreads, because it's all about leadership, is that micro aggression. And you see a lot from men, women talking, men jumping over the top, or being dismissed, or the men taking their ideas and calling it out. Really taking the ownership and calling it out is key. And then some of the systematic things that we're doing lots in this area. So we are going for a huge upgrade on our welfare facilities. And if you look at my sort of 4 big water supply works that treat about 40% of my customers, when I joined, believe it or not, 2 of those sites didn't have any female toilets, all male. And we are upgrading all of our sites, so no employees more than 2 miles away from a toilet, and it has male and female toilet. PPE, having female PPE, rolling that out across the estate. Sounds obvious, but that wasn't in place, and we're rolling that out at the moment. Makes a real difference to our females. And then really talking and sharing, and we've done 2 of these now, company stand downs. Whenever we hear poor practices, and there are poor practices, and it amazes me it happens, and it deeply upsets me it happens, Lawrence Marcia, again, is very passionate about talking to the business, and we've done 2 business-wide stand downs to call that out and just make it very clear is unacceptable. And when we do hear it, we get rid of that individual. We do not tolerate it, zero tolerance to it. In terms of misogyny, poor behaviours, we just don't tolerate it. So really, it's about the tokenism question, PPE, welfare facilities, some really good examples of not just saying things, seeing people at the top, people have things to aspire to, and then talking about it, leading from the front. That's what my 3 key messages really.
Great, thank you, Tim. Thank you to Ian. We've got a couple of questions that have come in on the Q&A, which are very similar to the questions that I was going to go to next. So I think we'll go straight to those, and I'll open this up, Emily, to. And sorry, there's another poll just popped up if you can answer that one. But Emily, Tim, and Ian. Question from Ludmilla. What are in your view, are those sort of small cultural changes? You've touched, both of you, all three of you really have touched on this to a degree, but what small cultural changes have the biggest impact? Tim, I really like your one. I mean, as somebody with very small feet, actually, it isn't just about inclusivity, it's about safety. So some of those basic hygiene factors are actually about operating as a safe organisation as well as an inclusive organisation. Emily, what's your view on those small cultural changes that have the biggest impact?
Yeah, and we shouldn't forget the power of symbolism, should we? Right.
No.
And we talk about them being small, but actually they're very profound. So, I mean, I can't believe we're even talking about this, but this is the root of some of this. But having PPE that's appropriate and fit. So, for example, you may or may not know that women's Achilles are shaped very differently to men's.
Mhm.
So their workwear, their footwear, which is sort of the very, very bottom of the Maslow hierarchy of needs, right? We need to make sure that we've got PPE that is fit for purpose, that fit female bodies, and is appropriate. I think the other thing, which we call it small, but again, it's profound, is lone working. So if we're talking right at the very front line of our organisations, quite often our people are going out as single person into the sort of communities. And unfortunately, the statistics are a little bit horrible. If you're a lone female, you're more likely to be attacked. So actually having really thoughtful processes and approaches about lone working for women will invariably make it more attractive for women to come into our industries. And then finally, again, very basic, which is making sure that the physical environments in which we work are fit for purpose. So, appropriate showering facilities and toilet facilities that allow women to feel safe and clean. So they're small, but they're profound things and symbols that say we are an inclusive organisation and we welcome everybody and everything into our team. So they would be the things that I would think about. But I think maybe if I just have an added extra, I normally do threes, but I'll add a fourth one in, is ensuring that women have safe places. So I talked a little bit about the power of networks and the power of the collective, and places where they can see people that look and sound just like them, to air their concerns in psychological safety, actually work through the problems, be part of the solutions themselves, and having those networks in place, I think is really, really important. So there you go. That would be my little contribution.
Great, thanks, Emily. Ian, to build on that.
Not sure I can. I think Emily said some brilliant stuff there. So I won't repeat, other than I'll just reinforce the design point, right?
Yeah.
Pharma, drugs designed around men, seatbelts designed around men, football boots designed around men, Achilles issues, all that sort of stuff. So I think that's such a big point for us. And we're only probably talking about the obvious now. So what more areas of our businesses are, needing those design cues? We talk about customer experience design. We should talk a little bit more about this stuff. I think it's really interesting territory. Then I think there's some aha moments that people need. I was really struck, even at my age, even with my experience, and even thinking I do some of this stuff well, maybe not as well as I thought, by your story, Sarah, which I've heard before, and Emily's story. And it just makes you sit back and think, oh my goodness, is that what life is like for my colleague? So how many more stories will our female colleagues be willing and happy to share with our colleagues around the business, so that it wakes us up and it stops us becoming where we are doing a good job, right? Because this stuff will only be as good for as long as we take it seriously. So if we don't embed it and we don't tell those stories and we don't make it part of our folklore, then we won't make the changes. So I think that's a really big thing that we could do culturally. And again, I'll pause there and
can I just ask you a follow-up question, Ian? That I know Emily and I, I should have said both Emily and I are on the board of the Women in Utilities Network, and one of the things that we talk a lot is not needing men to be our heroes when we're in the room.
Yeah.
So if I'm in a room and somebody says something that I think is misogynistic or sexist, I can defend myself. I guess my challenge to male allies is often, well, what do you do when I'm not in the room? And I'm just interested in your thoughts on that,
Yeah.
Ian.
So I mean, it's really interesting. So here at SES, in my CEO role at SES prior to being acquired here, there were some instances where I could clearly see language in operational environments where, and it would seem quite innocent, where an ops director would stand up and say, "Good morning, gentlemen,"
Yeah.
and there'd be a female apprentice at the back of the room, sadly at the time, and I would take that individual aside and just talk a bit later about say, this is not a big deal because you've probably done this all your life, but you're a very intelligent individual. Have you ever stopped to think that as we're growing the female colleagues through your organisation, how someone might feel when you open up with something as simple as "Good morning, gentlemen"? So when you're not in the room, what I would like
Gendered
to do is
language.
rather than confront people unnecessarily sometimes to make them feel bad. Now,
Yeah.
you do have to call people out in the rooms as well. You have to do both. But sometimes you just gently need to take people aside and ask them the question, how would you feel? Or would you like to think about how you might do that differently? And I've seen that in a number of instances, and it works pretty well. Most people take those messages on board and run with them, and some don't, and they're harder work. And maybe sometimes they might need more interventions than kind
Right.
of necessarily I would like.
Thank you, Ian. Tim, your thoughts on this broader question about small cultural changes, if you've got anything to add to that one. Or
Oh,
if not, I'm going to come on to the next question so you can maybe cover this and the next one, which is,
okay.
and Emily's already touched on this a little bit in her fourth of three, is how do we create a safe environment so people feel confident enough to share their personal experience. So just to give some context, it took me a long time to share stories from early on in my career. I do that publicly now because I think it's important. I was very embarrassed to share those experiences when they were happening because I thought it was my problem. So how do we create those environments where women can share those experiences, not just with other women, but as Ian said, sometimes you're quite shocked that, right, that's still happening.
Yeah. Well, I think in Emily answered the questions around culture perfectly. I think the only build I would add would be at the beginning of every meeting that we have, particularly at senior levels, we have a health and safety moment. We now have a health and safety wellbeing moment, and within that, we actually start talking about ED&I and some of the sort of stories that we've heard that leads to actions. And as an executive, I'd say over the last year, probably more than half of our health and safety moments now relate to ED&I things, and that therefore drives us talking about it, taking it more seriously, leads to further conversations down the business, and that sort of leads to a sort of wider conversations on the questions around a safe environment. I think I'd use the Women's Network, to be honest, and we did a fantastic one about a year ago. It's pretty horrible about sexual assault in the workplace and allyship, and we had females with their male allies on the call, and horrendous, really, the number of females who've been through pretty harrowing experience in their life and how they've been supported by males in the workplace. And it was amazing. But I'd say there was probably 30, 40 females talking about their experience. Went well over an hour and just talking about some of those issues, and therefore that's their safe place. They've got people that they know they can go to, be it men, be it female. And in the Women's Network chat that we have is by far my biggest chat on Microsoft Teams. Hundreds of chats today about certain things. So I think that just leads to a community of people they can go and talk to and who have had similar experiences that creates that safe environment. The other bit I'd like to add, though, if I may, is when we do hear about poor behaviours, we are not afraid as a business to go straight to the top. So I had some pretty poor behaviours from a contract the other day. Within 2 days, I got their managing directors on a call saying, in a week, I want a response and what are they doing about it? And we had a response last week and they took action. So anything where we see some really poor behaviours, you have to react quickly as leaders, be it male or female. You need to react quickly to show that you're taking it very seriously, which is what we do.
Which sort of picks up my follow-up question there, Tim, around don't be my hero when I'm in the room. How do you deal with that in genuinely structural and systemic ways?
Yeah.
We've got another question around inclusive talent management. Emily, you look like you're ready to answer that one.
Inclusive talent management. Right. So, look, right, if we all sort of like face into this, right, there are, I think, specific challenges that face women. And I know that's a very big sort of general statement, but when you lift the bonnet, there is confidence, there is issues around backing yourself, needing to be like ready, like literally ready to take the next leap or the sideways move. And really, that's quite a big difference, again, being quite generalistic around how men think about their career journeys and think about their own personal talent. And really, for organisations, what that means is they sort of need to lean into that, recognise their specific challenges, specific opportunities, and grow that resilience and confidence with working in women in a slightly different way. So I think sort of talent in general, there's probably an offering that looks a little bit different to the norm, and probably a sort of a check and balance against the offering in general against that sort of challenge for women particularly. I think the other thing is that, and it was really great to hear what Ian was saying about the representation of leadership and women being around the table leadership. I think naturally having that balance in the room makes sure that we're thoughtful about the representation of our women coming through the sector, and that we can sort of like make sure that we put our unconscious bias to the side by just naturally having that mix around the table as well. So that's probably my thoughts. The key thing is that recognizing there's difference, that we need to lead into that difference to support it, making sure that you've got good representation around the table so that you can spot those challenges and opportunities.
Great, thanks, Emily. And Ian, this strikes me, this question around key elements of inclusive talent management links back to something you said earlier as well. You ask women. Do you want to sort of give any thoughts on that? What would you see as those key elements of inclusive talent management? And when you ask women, do you have that experience of actually they do want different things?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think what they want is fairness and inclusivity. I don't, frankly, hear you as a gender in meetings
No.
or in the workplace asking for anything different than a lot of men take for granted, right? And which brings me to the talent question in a slightly different way. So, do you know where the talent is? Is the key question, and do you know how to go find it, and do you know how to go tease it out? And quite often, and this is a gross generalisation for which I apologise, but in my experience, slightly more prominent for a male colleague to knock on my door and say, "Can I have a pay rise or can I have a stretching project?" than it is for a female colleague, right? So I think we just have to recognise that stuff is built up over many years of the way that women have been treated in the workplace and expected to show up and all of that stuff. So I think we've got to overtly go out and make sure we know where the talent is. Who is driving those performance wins? Do we really understand that? And if we find out that it's Emily or it's Sarah or it's Rosie, we make a point of going to find out how they go about what they do. And we make a point of finding out whether or not they're up for an even bigger stretch challenge. So you've somehow got to find the talent and then almost ensure that you can create the foundations and opportunities for the talent to then go do something else to prove itself. And then if you're going to put that talent and a female colleague in an operational environment, in this particular case, you have to make sure that you're not setting them up to fail. Because we've mentioned already right at the start of this call, if we put people into some operational environments that may not be designed around them and they walk into banter in a site or no facilities or the wrong PPE, they're focused, as Emily says, on the wrong stuff. So you've got to make sure that you design some of the opportunities you give them around the talent you've identified.
That's really great build, Ian. I think it links to that point that Emily made. It's about recognizing that this is a generalization. It's not true across the board, but in general, women are less confident to demand the same progression as their male colleagues. I'm very conscious of time now. Tim, did you have anything you wanted to add to that point around inclusive talent management before
No, I think Emily and Ian covered it really well.
Great. So that just leaves me to say thank you very much to our three panelists. Some really good debate. As I said at the beginning, today is very much the start of a conversation. We will be having a further webinar later in the year before Glasgow, focused very specifically on male allyship. So just say thank you to Emily, Ian and Tim. And I think that means I will move on to our next panel. So thank you very much.
Right,
Thanks,
thank
Sarah.
you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you all. Cheers.
Thank you. So our next session is focused on prosperity as an inclusion for and inclusion as a driver for global impact. So I'm going to hand straight over to Melina, who will introduce herself and share some of her thoughts with us.
Hello, everyone, and a huge thank you to everyone for tuning in and bearing with us. My name is Melina Persson. I have the great honor of running the water sector for Microsoft in the UK. Alongside with that, I also am an active member of our Women in Microsoft network, and I run our Tech Hub for Water Digital Skills Initiative. Let me just do this here. Now, I can't see the chat, but I assume that everyone's with us. So I want to start up by asking a question. When you guys hear the word Microsoft, what is the first thing that comes from mind? I'll ask some of my co-panelists to help and contribute me here. I'm hoping you're going to say things such as like Microsoft Teams. Some of you might say Excel. I know Emily Timmins would obviously say Copilot. What have you got going? If you can start typing some things into the chat, and then we'll see check in a second.
Software, computers.
All right, that's helpful.
Big tech.
I love that. That's all very true.
Office.
What I want to talk about, though,
office packages. Lots of
there
people
we
saying
go.
office.
Yeah, we do a lot. What's really important, though, and what we need to remember is what sits behind all of that is people. And technology, the technology that you interface with and interact with every day is built and shaped by people. And very much like in the water sectors, the decisions that we make as Microsoft affect public health, affordability, resilience, the environment, customer trust. So if the people that are designing and governing this technology doesn't reflect the community that we serve, we're automatically building in blind spots into our systems. So let me ask you another one. If we then think about the people that work at Microsoft, what do you picture when you think about a Microsoft leader? I'll give you a hot second to do that. My assumption is it's probably something like this.
Inclusive, men, and yeah, men.
Appreciate that. For those who remember and were around in 1995, this is Bill Gates and Microsoft's leadership team announcing the Windows 95 launch. As you can see, it's an incredibly diverse crowd that's on that stage. And the reason I want to highlight that is because we are a 50-year-old technology company, and as many organizations, we are also on this journey. The big difference is we have just had a lot longer in terms of a runway. So to us, diversity and inclusion is about fairness, it's about being valued for who you are, and all that matters, that's full stop, non-negotiable. But to Microsoft, it's also about performance strategy. It's proven many times over, if you look at big consulting groups like McKinsey and BCG, organizations with more diverse leadership have stronger financial results, better innovation outcomes, they spot risks earlier, they make better decisions, and they build solutions that work for more people. And if you know of Microsoft, we're a big technology company. We're very much a result of that. So why does diversity and inclusion matter to Microsoft? It's an intrinsic part of how we build our technology and how we partner with our customers. Because very much like in the water sector, we are built on trust. And neither of us can afford to design a future with only half the perspective. So what's our vision within this? It's actually quite simple but powerful. We want all genders to thrive equally at Microsoft. So how are we going to get there? Well, I think openly, this is where we also address that we have some challenges. Our main thing is increase representation of women all up. We know that we tend to retain more women and attract more women if we can showcase strong female leadership across every single level of the organizations. Many businesses got really good at hiring women or deliberately trying to put women at the very top, including we see that in the water sector in the UK. But it's the middle that tends to get a little bit gray. So what we want to do is have fairness across all, because where we're trying to get to is we want an inclusive workplace where everyone feels like they belong and they get equally treated no matter what gender you identify with. And I think it's important to call out, women in Microsoft is not necessarily about excluding anyone. And for someone who is born and raised in Sweden, I think this is a really key point to discuss. Gender equality isn't about creating a select community that others can't be part of. Communities are important, but let's remember, communities are about opening doors, not closing them. And we've spoken a bit about allyship today, but if there's one main takeaway that I'm giving to everyone here who's on this call, you have to bring people along on the journey. This is a team sport. So if the diversity and inclusion initiatives that you're running feels like a side group, you've missed the mark. Inclusion only works when everyone is bought in, and Allies is a huge part of that progress. So what are we practically doing? Number one thing for us is representation. We focus on fair hiring, pay, promotion that is then backed by active sponsorship so that underrepresented talent from whichever group you categorize with have real opportunity and visibility. The second thing is allyship and inclusive leadership, which is built into every day. It's how we run our meetings. It's how we make our decisions. It's how we share our work. Our ally programs are directly backed by our CEO, and it's through that conscious level of leadership that you make it consistent. The third is flexibility and well-being. Retention is actually the real test here. We openly say, and I'll recommend this to all of you, you are custodians of your people's characters, not the owners, which means that we need to train our managers accordingly. They need to be equally as educated about what happens when you fall pregnant as what happens when you run through menopause, so that they can build conscious work environments for people regardless of where they are in their life, so that you can support people long term. The third thing for us is flexibility. So flexibility is recognizing the fact that in many families and organizations, women tend to carry a slightly different part of the load. So how can we offer in flexibility where possible so that we can factor in childcare as a natural form of running our day-to-day and our work, rather than having people feel like they're being penalized for it? This is particularly a big challenge in the UK. The fourth thing for us as well is then how can we take some of the learnings that we've had as an organization and support our customers through this initiative. Now, you heard me talk in the earlier, we've run something called Tech Her for Water. I imagine here, most people have heard about AI. Now, openly, some of the trends that we are seeing is, especially within the water sector, the initiatives that we're driving in terms of efficiencies and productivity gains are actually heavily geared towards where has been historically very female-dominated parts of the business. So the women that we have fought so hard of bringing into the business are now being put at risk due to the evolution of technology. So it is so important that we support them and equip them with the digital skills so that they can thrive in what is the future of digital utilities. It's a way to create a community and a pathway into different digital and tech roles so that you're more educated about technology whenever this pops into conversation. So if anyone wants to know more about Tech Her for Water, you can scan this QR code right here, wherever it is on your screen. And you have a chance to join a 5-part program where you can learn everything that you need to know to walk into the most technology conversations, and you kind of know what you're talking about. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you very much, Melina. And I can see we've got a couple more questions come in, but I'm going to just pause before I hand over and ask Jabu to introduce herself. I think we've got our fourth and fifth polls going to pop up. So this is a really key one for us. As I said at the beginning, our ambition for Glasgow 2026 is that it is the most gender diverse and most gender welcoming conference to date. One of the things we're working on, and it's been really interesting to hear from Emily, Ian, and Tim on this, is ensuring that women feel welcomed at all events, including traditional male events such as the operational challenge and the site visits. So we're asking, if it proves to be a success, what will be different in 3 years' time? So if we could get some answers in on that, that will really help us with our planning over the next few months. Are we putting poll 5 up as well, Erin? Okay. So I think I will now hand over. Thank you, Melina, and stay there because we have got some questions for you. And I will hand over to Jabu. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. And my name is Jabu Mashwama. As has been indicated, I am actually the CEO of a water utility in our kingdom, which is the Kingdom of Eswatini, right at the bottom of the African Horn. And I am extremely honored to be a part of this very important conversation today. I've learned a lot already, and I'm looking forward to more interaction. So I will take us through, let me get this right. I'm controlling. Yes, I am. Okay, so it's not doing what I thought it would do. Okay, there we are. So quickly, I will talk through as the topic is about prosperity. So we'll just look at what are the stats and in our country, in our continent, and also what are the chances of prosperity without focusing on this issue of gender and inclusivity, and just look as well specifically on what are we doing as the water utility in the kingdom to try and right this wrong, as it were. So Eswatini is a developing country in the bottom of Africa, and prosperity obviously becomes an important issue to a country like ours. I'm trying to move the slides forward, and they're taking a bit longer. Eswatini is a developing country, as I've said, and prosperity is important. And without looking at this issue in the water sector, the chances of all the activities that the country continues to do in terms of gender, in terms of prosperity, unlikely to realize them if we're unable to actually manage this issue appropriately. I think if you could take back the moving of the slides, because on my end it's just jammed. So I'd be glad if you could. Yes, thank you. So here are the stats. For example, obviously some of the issues have already been highlighted, that if we don't get this right, women are the custodians, particularly in a developing country, are the custodians of actually looking after all the issues that pertain to water in a home, in a community. And if we don't actually ensure that they're included when we're talking about development, be it in our organizations, be it in our countries, etc., the chances of getting that development correct are next to nothing. But we are conscious of that, we know that, but what is actually happening on the ground is not that. For example, in terms of the stats, as you can see them here, only 54% of households have water in our country, and 57% of women actually collect water from other sources. So that means they're spending a lot of time doing these activities and reducing their ability to do a bit more productive work and contributing significantly. In terms of health and dignity, we find that 5% of women actually miss work or school because of the issues of water, of lack of access to wash. So in Africa, the issue is not different as well. I really am not happy with the fact that this does not move forward. Please move the slide. Thank you very much. And in Africa, the issue is actually not different at all. You know, the decision making in the water sector is very, very much male dominated. 17% of the national water ministries are actually headed by women, and the rest is men. And 9% of the transboundary water bodies, which are the institutions that look after all the water courses in Africa as a whole, though it's only 9% of those are women. And yet we say that women are the ones that are users and are the key custodians in this area. And we find that in terms of daily water care and burden, 70% of households actually put that care and burden upon women. So truly speaking, it is not possible for us to be able to develop if we don't take care of this issue. And we know that 7 out of 10 households are without water in their premises. So women are spending a lot of time trying to get wash services for their families, but they do not have the say in terms of what needs to be done there. Next slide. It's very interesting that at the policy level in Africa, this issue has been identified as a key issue that must actually be taken care of. For example, this year there's a state in the AU summit, the African Union summit, they actually declared this year as the year of assuring sustainable water availability and safe sanitation systems. That means the heads of states of all of the African continent understand that if we don't actually give this the highest priority that it deserves, we're not going to experience our development and that we aspire. And the aspiration is that 30 billion of US dollars should be pumped into the continent annually so that by 2030 we actually get our espoused goals. And there's a lot of great things that have been said. The African ministers as well, they've actually have got a strategy, a strategy of 2023 that talks to youth and gender and the water and strategic water is a strategic asset for Agenda 2026 as well, which is the African agenda, etc. So there's great recognition of this at policy level, and likewise at the regional SADC level, we're seeing the same thing. So there's high level political commitment across Africa on gender responsiveness for the wash sector. However, is that turning out to be realized on the ground, or is it just these are just declarations that are being made, but we're not experiencing them as such, which is what I propose. Next slide, please. Now, so back to the utility that I run. So what are we doing at Eswatini Water Services? So I am, as I said, the CEO, and I'm the first female CEO at the utility since the utility has been operating for over 30 years, and I'm the first female CEO. And I think we are very conscious as a utility of the fact that we cannot actually drive this utility to prosperity, because we run it and we're supposed to run it in a way that's commercially viable. And for us to be able to experience that, we need to ensure that the infrastructure, not just the physical infrastructure, but even the human capital infrastructure is appropriately structured for us to actually experience that prosperity that we espouse. So at governance level, at the board level, 50%, fortunately for us, is female, and at executive level, it's 43%. This has not always been the case. This is things that are happening in the last 4 or 5 years in terms of turning this situation around. We are intentionally now, as the former colleagues have spoken, trying to look at what's happening in the middle and all the way down in terms of this issue of gender, equality. And we are finding that obviously it was previously a very male-dominated industry, and for the first time in last year or the year before, it's the year before last, we were able to introduce, for example, female operators. All along, it had never been heard of. It was always going to be males, because it was believed that it's only males that are supposed to operate in that. But we have intentionally put out a strategy that's looking at what are we going to do to ensure that we introduce a bit more female representation at all levels of the corporation, because that is the only way that we can be able to see this prosperity that we espouse. We are also actually looking at STEM as well. What's happening in the areas, because the water sector and utilities specifically is very focused in terms of, is very technical focused, and it's a STEM focused industry. what's happening in that space? Are we perpetually getting male engineers or male scientists, laboratories, etc.? We are introducing systematically the balance to ensure that we actually have women, because women are just as equally as important as male. And I think I like what my colleague has just presented, that it's not about saying we're moving one gender at the expense of the other, but it's about saying let us develop together, because collectively we make a better world. So we've got policies in place, and we're introducing systemically. And I want to present to us that this is not something that's happening very easily, because there's a lot of things you have to deal with: mindsets, shift, and also looking at the design. Is this design appropriate? Will it fit women? Do we have in the treatment plans, for example, adequate systems that protect women's dignity? Because women will come, they'll be pregnant, they'll have their menstrual cycle, they'll have all of those things. Are they not going to be discriminated when they have to actually take things that make them women? So we are continually looking at then how do we ensure that our treatment plans and our work environments are suitable for the women as well. And that is something that's going to take time because of investment that's supposed to be there, but also a mindset shift on the other colleagues, that the women that are being introduced in that small quarter that they're being introduced in are able to feel welcome, because this has always been a male dominated area. And some of the things that they give feedback to us on is that where in the tea time or whatever, the conversation is very male. It's actually very derogatory to you as a woman. So this is beginning, they need to have some element of resilience themselves, as they are the forerunners of the other women that will come in the future. How do they then represent and stand up for the women that are going to eventually now be part of the operations in the future? So this is a transitional phase, which is very interesting, and we're learning through it, but we are very intentional about it. We are not going to make it an accidental issue, but because we know that it actually determines the prosperity of our utility. Next slide. Some of the things that we're doing as well, as we are the entity that provides water in the entire country, is to ensure that the infrastructure that we provide actually is suitable for women. So there's two methods of water provision in our country. One, you'll have water right in your home, right in your yard, but in the rural areas where homes are sparsely populated, people cannot afford to actually draw water and have it coming out on their taps, on their yards. We need to provide water in a nearby area where they can collect it. So we have what we call water kiosks, where people can go and buy water in a nearby area, and we actually try and make sure that those designs are suitable for women, because we understand that it's women that actually collect water, and we want to ensure that as well we position them strategically so that women don't have to walk long distances to find a kiosk, etc. And we also, the kiosks are run by community members, and we are promoting that women be some of the people that run those kiosks, because they are the ones that have the understanding of what are the needs of the women in the community, and to ensure that these kiosks meet the needs of the people. So this is something that's very, very intentional. And then whilst we're there working with the communities, we also drive the education and the mindset shift. So we have a lot of awareness sessions that we run with the communities that we work in, to try and just introduce the fact that it is important for us to actually work in this sector conscious of the women's needs. Next slide. So there's a big project that we're doing in one of our rural areas in one of the regions in Shiselweni at the moment, that's looking at now water and also sanitation. And this is a real issue. This is a project that's about to be completed and sealed in the next 2 months or so. And that picture that you see at the bottom there is part of what some of the sanitation services that actually existed not long ago, I'm talking about now, and we are replacing those with those sanitation, better sanitation facilities, as you can see it. And the one at the top there is a school which did not have sanitation facilities, and we are now building those, and we are continuing the education and talking about the importance of dignity. Why is it important for us to provide sanitation services that dignify the woman so that they can feel protected? Because in our area, and I think it's a problem throughout the world, to be honest, this gender violence as well is something that we need to take care of, which women suffer, particularly when they're trying to get wash services, and wash services are not easily or appropriately designed for their needs. And we're finding gender-based violence is increasing. So we are intervening in this manner and ensuring that we are actually providing this type of services and dignified services for women across the nation. I will move on. Next slide. I think I'm about done. So basically, in conclusion, what I'm saying that we need to take the policy to action. So what needs to be done? So the call to action is that let's ensure that we institutionalize women leadership in water governance. There's no question about it. They understand what's needed. They are big players in the sector. Let's ensure that women take significant roles, not just at governance level, but all the way down. So that's the first call to action. Second, let's invest in gender responsive infrastructure and technology. This is our call. We're doing that, and we're saying let's drive this particular agenda and ensure that all entities, not just water, but all entities are actually looking at how to ensure that we include women when we're designing infrastructure and technology. And also let's align our financing with gender priorities as well. Let's ensure that when we've got gender priorities articulated from our policy levels, from our countries, etc., let's ensure that we call it out when the budgets are being appropriated, to ensure that what is being declared is matched with the finances that are being appropriated for the activities that speak to that. And I think lastly, let's continue to foster partnerships and knowledge exchange. So webinars like these ones are very important so that we can raise the awareness. And I think the Women in Water program that's being launched in this year's Congress is absolutely important for the agenda and for the time that we live in such as now. So with that, I think I will end my presentation there. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Great. Thank you very much, Jabu, and thank you very much, Melina. Melina, I can see you've been helping by answering some of the questions in the Q&A. What really struck me listening to both of you speak is the degree to which that whilst there are sort of regional challenges, a lot of the challenges are pretty basic and they are consistent across wherever you are in the world working as a woman in the water sector. I'm going to ask you, firstly, Jabu, really impressive stats in terms of gender diversity within your organisation. I'm the CEO of my organisation. I think one of the coolest things about being a CEO is you can address gender inclusion right from the top, and you can do it quickly. And that power of leadership is really, really important. But if you can, there's been a question around in countries where the water sector is still developing, how can we support women who want to grow professionally when their managers or directors do not allow them to attend trainings or webinars? And how can we encourage them, this is really Emily's point from earlier, to have the confidence to put themselves forward and be active and visible? And I'll be completely honest, it's one of the conversations we're discussing as an international panel is how do we ensure that women who want to come to Congress are given the funding and the support to attend, and make sure that there is gender parity in terms of people being able to come along. So I'd really appreciate your thoughts on that, Jabu. And then Melina, if you've got anything to add on that sort of broader confidence point, and how do we encourage women to get that support?
Yeah. So I think one of the key things like this, IWA is doing a very good job in terms of ensuring that this pillar is taken care of. So associations, belonging to associations is very pivotal. It's important. It actually widens the net. It actually gives you an ear of people that like-minded people are with you, and ensuring our associations that we register in our different countries and our different spheres are actually registered and are recognized by the government. Yeah. That actually is something that I think is very, very important. So IWA is doing a lot in terms of trying to ensure that we increase members and we increase the governance members. Why am I forgetting the name of that? But that drive to do that is actually going to make a big difference, because it's casting across the entire world, and we're actually looking at our statistics to say, wow, how many countries are represented and how many members, how many countries have got governing members, exactly that's the word, governing members at IWA, because IWA's agenda is very aligned with this. So I think association will assist a lot in terms of making sure that women get the development that they need, because sometimes, like you say, the men may be blind to it, and through the associations then we can advocate, and people like ourselves who are in positions of authority should actually be louder about this matter, so that people know that they have got an ally, as it were. And so I think that's what I would contribute.
Thank you, Jabu. And absolutely, one of our ambitions in the Women in Water programme is to connect women's networks from right across the world. So, Melina.
I think just potentially to add to that is if women are being kept in the background, I don't think the answer is to ask them to be louder on their own. We then need to look at how we can potentially redesign access, create more visible opportunities, or make leaders more accountable in terms of opening the door for them. That being said as well, and I know that it's something that women tend to be a fault of, it's better to ask for forgiveness than it is to ask for permission. At the rise of AI and the digital revolution in general, it now means that all the information that you need to be incredibly successful is at your fingertips. So you are the custodian and the owner of your future. If there is a topic that you want to learn about, if you want to reach out to me in the world of Microsoft, I'd be more than happy to lean out and support. But there is a wealth of information that you can take advantage of. You have everything to gain and nothing to lose by doing that. And actually by obtaining that information and improving it back to your organization, that is how we then drive systemic change. Because change, especially when advocating for women's rights, have never been and will never be comfortable. You're going to make a lot of people uncomfortable along on that journey. So just get ready to get uncomfortable, because that then means that we will see greater progress at the back of it.
That's a absolutely great point, Melina. Something we talk about is a lot is that these are not comfortable conversations. If we're having comfortable conversations about inclusion and gender, we're having the wrong conversations. But very specific question here for you, Jabu, which is a great question, is being the first woman in the CEO seat. So I guess to this point that Melina's just made, how has it been with the Ministry of Finance to get funding that is gender sensitive and inclusion? So any tips from the top seat?
That's interesting. So how our utilities run is that we actually don't get money subvented from the government. So we run it as a commercial entity. So the issue is now, how do I convince the board to appropriate the way that we should? And I think it's a matter of one, like the team has already said, easier because I am a woman, so it's going to be a bit difficult for you to say the leader cannot do that. So, but the critical thing that I actually do internally now with my staff is to say, guys, let's ensure that this is not about just it's nice to have a woman, but let's show that we are equally capable. We need to know that it's not just going to be handed out to us. We have to deliver what we need to deliver. So it's about excellence. And I think portraying the excellence is not a difficult thing for women to do, because women are great people at that. So it's driving the results. This is what the results you will see, and sharing those results to the board, and then and making the board understand that if we mirror what is out there in the society and we mirror it inside there, people and our customers will identify it with us better. So it's about selling the results, looking at what are the customer, for example, customer service targets. What are we trying to drive there? Always interpret that with the lens of why is it important to then include. And if they see that it actually affects the bottom line, it's a no-brainer. But it's not just selling gender equality for gender equality's sake. It's about the business. It's to make sure that business is sustainable and it's prosperous. So I think speaking the prosperity language and marrying it with the fact that gender will make sure that you actually get the prosperity that you want, then makes it that much easier for you to to get the approval for the funding.
Great, thank you, Jabrin. Very much aligns with what Melina was saying in terms of actually it's just maths at the end of the day. Businesses are more prosperous if they have greater gender inclusion. I'm going to have one final question I'm going to ask both of you. I'm going to come to you first, Melina, but really interesting in your role, which covers Microsoft is a worldwide international organisation. What's your perspective on the sort of political sentiment worldwide around EDI and gender inclusion? Have you seen any impact on your business? And I guess both of you, do you have any concerns about the political debate potentially derailing us doing the right things on gender equality? So I'll come to you first, Melina, and then I'll ask you, Jabu, to have the last word on this panel.
Yeah, look, I think this is an incredibly important conversation to have. And more importantly, obviously, we need to be conscious of where in the world politically we sit so that we tailor our message. But that doesn't mean it stops being important. Actually, I think it's quite the opposite. It's now that we really need to lean in and prove that the value proposition that we know already exists can tend to prove itself. And we're a multinational global organization, very openly when the world and most recently in the Americas told large organizations to cancel their diversity and inclusion programs, we refused. Because it sits as a core part of us as an organization. We were here before the current president. We will be here after the current president. And this is really a pivotal moment for organizations to stand by. What is the cultural matrix that makes up your organization? Because your people will remember how they were treated within that moment. And that's something that we pride ourselves around a lot, which anchors back to the beginning of what my presentation was, which diversity and inclusion is how we design technology for all. Yeah. So if we stop thinking about diversity and inclusion, we can't serve our customers.
You can't do your job.
And that is a much bigger mission than anything else.
That's great. Thanks, Melina. Jabu, last word to you.
Yeah. So I think from my perspective, the issue, political declarations have been made. I think it's fashionable to talk about gender, etc. But I mean, the issue is how does it play out on the ground? And I think my point is, and how I drive it is that if I am making a difference where I'm at, just the world is already a better place. So we should not be taking the victim mentality and talk about, but no one wants to listen to us, whatever. So I don't spend too much time on that area. I spend so much time on if I can change here, and hopefully what I am doing here attracts people, and tomorrow will be a better place. And also recognizing that the first movers are going to be hit, and there's going to be some difficulties that they're going to have to go through, and be willing to take that step forward and not be there, whining. And it's not that, it's not. This is what the environment looks like now. Let's change it, and someone has to lead it. So let's take it one bite at a time. And I believe that and influencing what we do, and more is called on the ones that are doing it for the first time, of course, than it would be expected for ones that will follow. So accepting that you may have to do and encounter more difficulties, and not complain about it, because in this area maybe you are leading, but someone led for you in another area, and you were able to get there, and it was much easier. So I'm like, we are called for such a time as this. Let's do what we can, and one bite at a time. If my nation is better just because of what I do, it's already a better place, and I think that satisfies me.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jabu. Thank you very much to all of our panelists. I think on that note, I will be handing back to Jill, who will provide some closing comments before we conclude today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you to everybody who's spoken. I feel lit up inside, really. That was one of the most inspiring things I've ever heard, especially you, Jabu. I love that. Make a difference where you are. So we've heard from lots and lots of people today about International Women's Day themes and IWA. I think what struck me most about this is the telling of personal stories, and, being willing to be a little bit vulnerable and just, say what's happened to you. I think that's really stuck with me. Then from Male Allyship, Ian and Tim, I think that was a great session. And having worked with Tim some of the time, I can attest to the fact that he is a real ally for women. All genders thrive, showcasing strong female leadership and fairness across all. That's what we've talked about with Melina. Equality is for everybody. Everyone is part of the community, and we all need to open doors for each other. That's what's sticking with me. I hope you've all enjoyed this session. I know I certainly have. It would be great to see as many of you as possible at IWA in Glasgow this October. Please get your early bird tickets in now. We will be doing more webinars over the coming months, and the link is there on the screen at the moment. So please sign up for those. And if there's something that you'd like to hear about, please get in touch with one of us. We're here to serve, so that would be great. And if we could do the last couple of poll questions, that would be excellent, about how we want to participate at Congress when we get there. So yes, I hope you've all learned something today. I certainly have. And thank you so much to everybody who's made the comments in the chat. That's been really so important, and everyone has been able to communicate with each other, which has been great. So yes, thank you to everybody. It's now coming up to 3:30, so we're going to call it a day there, I think. But yes, thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you the next time we get together for a webinar. Thank you, everybody.